You begin with an assumption that feels natural, that what you call knowledge is reliable. You treat your reasoning as stable, your perceptions as trustworthy, and your conclusions as grounded in something firm. Yet the moment you examine this confidence, its structure becomes uncertain. You rely on your mind to validate your judgments, but you also rely on your mind to validate the mind itself. Al-Ghazali identifies this issue early. If the mind is the instrument you use to measure accuracy, how do you verify the instrument? Using it to justify itself already assumes what you intend to prove. You begin to sense the circularity. The mind evaluates itself through the same process it tries to evaluate. If knowledge depends on the mind, who confirms the reliability of the mind? Philosophers trusted logic, theologians relied on doctrine, and mystics emphasized inner clarity. Each group believed its approach alone guaranteed certainty. Their systems appeared coherent, complete, and authoritative. But Al-Ghazali noticed that each discipline defended itself using assumptions it never examined. Every method justified itself through its own framework. If every discipline claims certainty from within its own assumptions, what distinguishes certainty from shared habit? Al-Ghazali eventually reached a point where the knowledge he trusted began to fracture. Sensory experience could mislead. Rational arguments could support opposite conclusions. Inherited beliefs were accepted because they were familiar, not because they were proven. You recognize this pattern within yourself. Ideas you once treated as unquestionable reveal their hidden premises. What seemed like certainty begins to resemble trust in repeated assumptions. Al-Ghazali saw that doubt does not weaken truth. It weakens the beliefs that cannot survive examination. If doubt removes false certainty, what examines the assumptions hidden within doubt itself? Reason persuades because it feels structured and precise. It moves through premises and conclusions in a way that appears orderly. But Al-Ghazali recognized that reason depends entirely on its starting assumptions. Without assumptions, no argument can begin. Philosophers tried to identify foundations that could not be questioned, yet every foundation required acceptance within the very rational system it attempted to justify. To affirm reason, you must already trust it. To evaluate reason, you must already be using it. You begin to see that reason excels at analyzing relationships but cannot justify its own origin. It clarifies but cannot ground itself. Al-Ghazali was not rejecting reason, he was defining its boundary. When asked to prove itself, reason becomes silent. If reason cannot confirm its own starting point, how does it confirm the conclusions built upon it? You often assume your judgments come purely from logic, but Al-Ghazali observed that reasoning is shaped by the self performing it. You defend ideas that support your identity and resist ideas that threaten it. What appears to be rational evaluation is frequently attachment disguised as logic. You notice this within yourself. When an idea fits your worldview, it feels persuasive. When it challenges your worldview, it feels flawed. The sense of I becomes an unspoken premise directing your conclusions. Al-Ghazali understood that the self quietly determines what feels acceptable to believe. Arguments reflect identity more than they reveal truth. The problem is not logic itself but the one who uses it. If the self remains unexamined, its preferences shape every conclusion. If reason is shaped by identity, how can identity claim objectivity? In Al-Ghazali's intellectual world, scholars were regarded as guardians of certainty. Their arguments were sharp, their reputations strong, their interpretations respected. Yet he noticed that intellectual communities often defend their assumptions rather than question them. Consensus becomes a barrier, not proof. You may accept ideas not because you have verified them, but because those you admire believe them. Authority becomes a substitute for investigation. Repetition becomes mistaken for truth. Al-Ghazali saw that when expertise replaces personal examination, knowledge turns into imitation. Shared agreement can create the illusion of certainty without providing its substance. If an idea survives because it is widely accepted, does that make it true or simply well protected? After recognizing the limits of external sources, Al-Ghazali turned inward. He realized that certainty could not be achieved through argument alone. It had to emerge from understanding the conditions under which perception operates. You begin to feel the shift. The question becomes not what is true, but how do I come to call something true? When you investigate the structure of your own perception, the assumptions underlying your judgments become visible. This inward turn is not emotional withdrawal, it is intellectual clarity. It requires examining how thought forms, how belief stabilizes, and how identity shapes interpretation. If truth must be found within, what is the nature of the you that performs the search? Al-Ghazali discovered that beyond argument lies a form of knowing that does not rely on premises. He described it not as intuition but as direct awareness, clarity that arises when the interfering activity of the self quiets. You notice this within yourself. Before you evaluate, compare, or judge, awareness is already present. Awareness does not need proof. Proof needs awareness. Doubt, certainty, confusion, and clarity all appear within awareness. Al-Ghazali recognized this as the first certainty, not because it is argued, but because even the act of doubting presupposes it. This recognition is not produced by logic. It is seen by observing the nature of experience. When awareness becomes unobstructed, truth does not need argument to be evident. If certainty arises from direct recognition, why does the mind demand proof for what is already undeniable? Al-Ghazali warned that the most dangerous form of knowledge is the kind that strengthens the self. When knowledge becomes identity, I know, I understand, I am correct, it blinds rather than illuminates. The self uses knowledge to protect itself and reinforce its superiority. You begin to see how easily learning becomes self-defense. Beliefs become psychological anchors rather than pathways to truth. The more you identify with what you know, the harder it becomes to see beyond it. Al-Ghazali called this the knowledge that kills faith, knowledge that turns the mind rigid. Faith is not destroyed by uncertainty. It is destroyed by the self's attachment to being certain. If knowledge becomes a possession, how can it reveal what lies beyond the one who possesses it? As Al-Ghazali continued inward, he realized that the final obstacle to truth was the belief in a fixed knower behind thought. The mind assumes it owns understanding, insights, and conclusions. But this sense of ownership creates tension, because the self seeks stability in what is unstable. When this illusion weakens, the division between knower and knowledge dissolves. Understanding appears without belonging to anyone. You begin to sense that awareness does not need an owner, it simply functions. Truth becomes clear not when the mind grasps it, but when the need to grasp disappears. If there is no owner of knowledge, what does it mean to know? When the need to defend conclusions falls away, a different form of knowing appears. It does not assert itself or demand recognition. It does not declare victory over doubt. It simply remains. This recognition is what Al-Ghazali considered true certainty, not argumentative, not conceptual, but self-evident. You begin to feel the difference between knowing and claiming. One is quiet, the other is restless. If knowing requires no claim, what becomes of the one who claimed to know? Inquiry ends not with an answer but with stillness. Thought no longer tries to validate itself. Argument no longer seeks dominance. Reason no longer demands certainty it cannot produce. What remains is awareness, direct, unforced, unobstructed. Truth is not manufactured. It is recognized when interference ceases. There is no triumph in this recognition, only clarity. In this silence, knowledge is no longer a possession but the ground on which every thought appears. If truth reveals itself only when argument stops, was argument ever the path to truth?